Thank you so much for joining us. This topic is going to be covering stage 9 of the Healing Gardens shifting and shadow work. This is actually a stage of healing. It comes right after you locate the calming the chaos, stage 8, when you begin therapy and you feel that shift. Once you get the grounding technique underway and you start to allow yourself to adjust from what is familiar, abuse and pain, to what is safe for you, even though it feels very unnatural. Something called sensitization has begun. We are going to be talking a lot on sensitization. For now, I want to focus on shifting and shadow work. If you look at the form that I provided, it says exploration, perception shift, the 5 stages of grief, and period of adjustment. Simply put, a very, this cycle is going to become your life for the rest of your life. The difference between when you start off and when you begin to heal, and once you've healed, is simply the frequency in which you go through this cycle. When you begin, you will spend anywhere from 2 to 5 years doing nothing but exploration, perception shift, 5 stages of grief, having that period of adjustment. I'm going to go through those in a moment and break them down for you. And then from there, you basically repeat that cycle over and over. Eventually, it starts to slow down. As you Every time you go through that cycle, you clear out a belief. You literally purge a toxic belief that your abuser impressed upon you. And that is going to cause a perception shift that's going to give you a new perception shift, but it's also going to change an old perception shift or a perception that you've had for so long that it's common to experience grief as you realize what it is that you believed for so long. Sometimes it's one of two things for me, I have found. It's either a loss of something you desired, or it's a realization of how abused you were. And those are really the two things over and over. Either it's having a perception shift so that you end up losing a future you thought you had that you love and desire. So you go through the stage of grief similar to a breakup, or it's that shift so that you realize, oh my God, was I that abused? Did they really do that to me? And that realization causes a whole nother level of grief that we're going to get into. So, as you clear out the garbage, as you weed out and purge all of these toxic beliefs that your abusers, all of them, have put inside of you, you're going to eventually reach a point where you're going to be in periods of adjustment more. And there's actually another stage that comes later where I call it just living. It's where you actually go about your day. And that going about your day living stage is something that you'll end up doing more and more, and you realize that that stage of living is actually where you're going to be spending a lot of your time once you're healed. But you can't just jump into living. You have a lot of baggage to clear out. And I'm going to strongly encourage that when you do enter a stage of living, that you embrace it. And I'm going to go over all of this in detail later. But when you reach that stage of living, you're going to embrace it. I'm going to encourage you to really, really enjoy it. Memorize the feelings because that is what you're looking to get to. Okay? But don't get too attached because, and this was my problem, is I got attached thinking, oh, I'm healed now. And this is very common. It's a milestone. It's not an end point. Do not confuse milestones for end points. There are no end points. Even after all of your healing is done, even after everything is out of you, and you finally reach that point where you go months, maybe even a couple years, where you're just living and enjoying life. And you don't have to go through the shifting and the constant shadow work. You're done with that, it's behind you. Let's fast forward 5 years down the road. You're going to still need to do the maintenance because there's a lot of data that constantly comes in that affects our perception, that shifts the way we see things. And going through this cycle allows us to constantly shift and make sure that we have no toxic or damaging beliefs inside of us that came in from a bad source, that came in from the newspaper, that came in from an unreliable bit of information, because all of those things contribute to your beliefs and contributes to your perception. So we're going to go ahead and start breaking this down now. Exploration is when you sit down, and I use meditation to do this a lot in cognitive behavior therapy, which we'll be covering later. As you explore into this, you basically use meditation to really dig deep into your emotions. You notice what you're feeling, and then I'm going to be showing you the step that takes to get you from emotion A to emotion B, so you can then interpret what these emotions mean and how those emotions plug into your cognitive core and your alignment, and you can locate the beliefs. Once you do this, you're going to experience a perception shift. You're going to reach a point of basically education, gives you awareness. The awareness alters your perception. When that shift happens, and they can be small shifts, they can be huge shifts, a lot changes. Mostly what ends up changing in a perception shift is your ability to conclude a reality. Reality is not fact. Reality is an opinion. It is exclusively the components that make up your experience. And that experience is solely based on your five senses, on your ethics, on your beliefs, on your past experiences. And when all of those things combine, they form a solid view of what you think reality is. Everyone is doing this. Everyone thinks reality is something. The misconception is that reality is fact, and it's not, because reality is only ever what we see it as. Reality is different from person to person. Reality is different from age to age. My reality today is very different from what my reality was yesterday. Yesterday, I was having a horrible day. I was in a very bad place. I spent a lot of time doing mental work yesterday. Today, I feel enlightened. I feel safe. I feel amazing. I feel fantastic. My self care that I did yesterday paid off so that today, my reality is now one of sunshine, happiness, and I feel content. It changes from day to day. Reality is what you perceive things to be. It is not what they are. It is not truth. Reality is perspective. So once you realize that, when you have a perception shift, it's going to change what your reality is. Your future changes. Your plans for the future change. And I said this a few minutes ago, that when this shift happens, one of two things happens. You either realize that you're losing, or you have lost, or you are resisting the loss. You're trying to prevent a loss from happening, where you really want a future to happen and you're not going to get that future. And that causes grief. That is a significant loss. And it's going to require you to go through the 5 stages of grief every time. The flip side of that is you realize that you were abused or deceived that drastically. That can cause resentment and anger and frustration. It can cause anger with yourself for allowing yourself to be put in that position. Again, in some cases, that causes the 5 stages of grief, because you are grieving the loss of a reality. You are grieving the loss of perspective. The 5 stages of grief. We're going to talk a lot about this. In fact, I have a Facebook group. If you are not part of it, you need to be part of it, the 5 stages of grief, because we cover this so much in the 5 stages of grief. This is why I mandate that everyone in the masterclass program has to be part of the group, the 5 stages of grief, is because it's not about death. It's about losing your perspective over and over and over and over and over. And you're going to lose so many different perspectives, but you're going to gain so many of your own perspectives. You're going to lose a lot of beliefs that aren't yours, and you're going to gain and find your own beliefs. This is healing. It is the process of purging the toxic belief and perception of abusers and replacing them with your own. This is abuse. This is what paying is. This is what gaslighting is. Gaslighting is the process of forcing your perspective on somebody else. Gaslighting is somebody forcing their perspective or belief into you, and it causes us cognitive dissonance and severe pain. So we're going to show you piece by piece how we're going to pull that out of us, okay? So when you get into the 5 stages of grief, the 5 stages are, and this usually happens in an order, but not all the time. There are no rules when it comes to emotions, just that they're very logical and that they are required to go through a process. So the first stage of grief is shock and denial. The second stage is negotiation. This is where you don't quite believe it, and you are basically putting everything through a system of, are you sure? Are you sure you tried everything? Are you sure you checked? Are you sure this is happening to me? Well, have you tried this yet? And that's negotiation. The third stage is anger. I love the anger stage. The anger stage is my absolute favorite stage. The reason why is because anger gets a bad rap. Anger is actually very good. Anger is the ultimate testament of self-love. When you get angry, you finally reach that point where you love yourself enough that you are upset that somebody did something to you. How dare they? That is anger. You need to embrace anger. We're going to go over a lot of how to transfer your anger into something healthy, like gardening and exercise. That way, your anger does not turn into violence and harm other people. The fourth stage is depression. This one is a stage that everyone struggles with. Not everyone. There's probably some people who are very good with getting right through depression. I would love to meet those people and talk to them. If you are one of them, please message me, contact me. I would love to talk to you about how you get through depression. I have yet to find anyone who does not struggle with depression. My depression usually lasts me 2 weeks. I can go through the exploration, the perception shift, and the first 3 stages of grief. I mean, quickly. I mean, I can get them done within a few hours. But that depression takes me about 2 weeks. And that's where you're going to have to pull your self-care regimen into place. This is why I give you a self-care regimen. You're going to need to pull that in when you hit the depression stage, and you're going to start putting yourself through it. When you go through the depression, and like I said, some people, it can last for a few days, it can last for a few weeks. You can get caught in any one of these stages, and it can last you several years. On big perception shifts, I could be sitting in a depression for 6 weeks. On the smaller perception shifts, I'm looking at about, no, 3 or 4 days. Um, and then you're in that depression again for a period of time. Eventually, the depression lifts. And once that happens, you basically get your life back. This is when you enter that period of adjustment. This is when you get into the next stage. It's acceptance is the 5th stage of grief. Acceptance. When you reach acceptance, that's where I implement the next stage, which is the period of adjustment. I don't want you to jump right back into exploring and doing shadow work. You just came out of depression. You need to celebrate this moment. You need to apply your self-care. This is your opportunity to, once you step into the period of adjustment, feel and memorize what that feels like. You just got a new perspective. Don't jump right back into shadow work. Sit with it. Learn what this feeling feels like. You have a new perspective. What about you has changed? Every time you alter your perspective, every time you alter yourself and you go through the stage, you are going to experience a change in your identity. This is huge. This is where you start to go, whoa, who am I? And if you do this so frequently, so much back to back to back, you are going to enter an identity crisis. We'll be talking more about that later. Identity crisis is when you start to break down everything around you, your perception, and you realize that you don't know who you are, because your identity, when you are abused, your identity becomes so infused with your abuser that you don't know who you are. You know what your abuser likes and doesn't like, but you don't know what you like, because your abuser never allowed you to explore that. This is called agency. It is a big deal. We're going to talk more about agency. So when you get to this point, you're going to have your period of adjustment. It's the time that you need to take for yourself. You need to explore self-care. You need to explore who you are. And you need to make sure you do not neglect your identity and your agency. We're going to walk you through the stage. That way, as you remove the identity of your abuser, you're not left in the middle of an ocean without a raft. We're going to build you a new ship in the middle of the ocean that is all about you. That way, you can survive, you can live, you can be you, hopefully without going through an identity crisis. So once you do that over and over again, once you go through the exploration, the perception shift, the 5 stages of grief, and then you enter the period of adjustment, that period of adjustment gets longer and longer and longer. And the more you heal, the longer you go in that period of adjustment. So my early goal for you, my goal early on, is to tell you, when you reach period of adjustment, try and stay in that period for as long as you can, because that's the sweet spot. That's where the magic happens. That's where everything comes together. That's where you flourish. That's where you find you. Now, at first, you're not going to be able to hang on to that for very long. It is common that when you have a perception shift, you immediately, and this is my problem, you immediately uncover a new perspective that sheds light immediately on a new belief that you are not a new belief, but an old belief that your past abusers had embedded into you. So sometimes, many times, in my opinion, too often, once you make a perception shift and you go through these stages, you get to a point where it immediately uncovers and reveals the next thing you need to uncover, the next belief that you need to purge from yourself. The problem is, this can happen so quickly, and this is my problem. This happens so quickly for me that, well, even 2 weeks ago, I ended up going through this full stage 5 times, back to back, to back, to back, to back. And yes, it was as unnerving and ungrounding as it sounds. It shook me up. And it's why I had a 6-week depression, is because I went through 5 different massive perception shifts, back to back to back to back to back, followed by a sustained period of depression from the 5 stages of grief that I went through for each and every one of those. And now, thank heavens, I am in a period of adjustment. So now I get to sit back, live my life, enjoy my work. I'm going to focus on self-care, make sure that I'm taken care of, exercise, eating right, taking showers, making sure I get the sleep that I need, taking my vitamins, and seeking out social situations where I embrace that. This is living. And I'm going to try and see how long I go during this period of adjustment. And I'm going to track it in a journal that I keep. And I'm going to be giving you this journal also. I'm going to be showing you how I do this, so that when you go through this period, you can notice how long this period of adjustment is going to take. And you want to track it. The first time I went through it, it lasted maybe a day. Now, these periods last about 6 weeks for me, literally 6 weeks in between. It matches the time of my depression. So once I mark that, then I'm going to see if I can get it to go 12 weeks. And then I'm going to make sure it goes 24 weeks. And this is the process. It's because I keep pulling out I keep purging these toxic beliefs and reinventing and building my own agency and supplanting the purged toxic beliefs with my own. And as I do this, this is the beautiful thing. As you do this, you're going to build confidence. I don't have to give you classes on confidence. This is going to come to you naturally. You're going to develop self-esteem, pride. You're going to love yourself. This is all consequential to restoring and repairing this process. By the way, the exploration, perception shift, 5 stages of grief, period of adjustment, these stages is the Rorschach print perspective. I have an entire week dedicated to just this process. So the shifting and the shadow work, that's what we're going to cover a lot of in the masterclass. This is absolutely the core of the Healing Garden. This information is so vital that I make sure everyone gets it free. I include it in my original webinar in my ad so that people who see my ad get this information without even joining the Healing Garden, because this is how healing happens. This is it right here. So we're going to dig deeper into this. We have Thursdays, I have a Q&A where you can submit your questions and I will answer your questions if there's any if you have any roadblocks, anything like that that comes up. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, and I think that covers everything on there. If there's anything else, I will document it in the course. Thank you again so much for joining me, and may the kindest of words always find you.